There are a few things I want to say before I tell you this story, because I think they matter. I was 29 years old when my mother-in-law decided that my pregnancy was a threat to her bank account. I was 32 when I stopped being afraid of her. And I was 33 when I finally understood that the best thing she ever did for me was show me exactly who she was before I wasted another decade of my life. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. My parents were both teachers. We were not wealthy, but we were steady, and steady felt like everything when I was young. I was the kind of kid who color-coded her notes, who stayed late to help the teacher stack chairs, who believed deeply and probably naively that if you worked hard enough and were kind enough, the world would be kind back. I carried that belief with me all the way to my late 20s, right up until the moment it nearly got me killed. I met my husband at a friend's birthday dinner. He was funny in a quiet way, the kind of funny where you almost miss it if you're not paying attention. We dated for 2 years. He was attentive and warm, and I genuinely loved him. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easier to tell this story if I could say I never loved him, if I could say I saw the red flags from the beginning and ignored them out of desperation. But that is not true. I loved him. I just did not know yet that love for a person and love for a family are two completely different negotiations. His mother was not warm when I met her. She was not unkind either. Not overtly. She was precise. Carefully, deliberately precise. She said the right things in the right tone, and somehow you always left a conversation with her feeling slightly smaller than when you walked in, but you could never quite name why. My friends asked me what she was like, and I would say something like, "She's a lot," and then change the subject because I didn't have the language for what she was. What she was, I understand now, was a woman who had spent 40 years controlling every room she walked into, and had no intention of stopping. My husband was her only son. His father had passed away years before we met. There was a trust, significant, generational, the kind of money that changes the temperature in a room when it's mentioned. My husband was set to access the bulk of it once he had a child. That was the condition his grandfather had written into the document decades ago. Old-fashioned, yes, but that was the structure. His mother had been managing the trust in the interim, drawing a stipend, keeping her lifestyle intact. A grandchild would trigger the full transfer. And that, I would eventually learn, was the problem. We had been married for 2 years when I found out I was pregnant. I remember the morning clearly. I was standing in our bathroom in the house we had bought together in North Carolina, and I was holding the test with both hands because I was shaking slightly. Not from fear. From something that felt enormous and good. I was so happy. I called my mother first. I cried on the phone with her for 10 minutes. She cried too. It was the kind of moment you keep in your chest for the rest of your life. We decided to tell his family in person. His mother had a standing Sunday dinner, something she had maintained for years, a weekly ritual she took seriously. We drove out to her house, about 40 minutes from ours, and I remember thinking on the way there that this was going to be a good day. I remember thinking that even she would have to soften for this. I was so wrong. Dinner was already on the table when we arrived. His sister was there too, seated at the end near the window. His mother was in the kitchen when we walked in, and she came out wiping her hands on a dish towel, and my husband told her. He said, "Mom, we have news. We're expecting." She went completely still. Not the still of surprise. The still of someone running calculations. She looked at me instead of him, not at my face, at my stomach. It was a long, assessing look, the kind a jeweler gives a stone they suspect is fake. Then she smiled, and the smile didn't reach anything above her cheekbones, and she said, "How wonderful." In the same tone you'd say, "How unfortunate." I told myself I was reading into it. I told myself that was just how she was, that warmth was not her language, that I should give her time. I sat down at that table, and I ate her food, and I talked about names and due dates, and I pretended I had not seen what I just saw in her eyes. What happened over the following weeks happened gradually, and then all at once, the way bad things often do. She started calling my husband daily, pulling him into conversations I wasn't part of, suggesting they have lunch, just the two of them, and when he came home from those lunches, he was quieter. Different. Like something had been adjusted in him while I wasn't looking. Then, one evening, he sat across from me at our kitchen table and said, very carefully, that his mother had some concerns about the timing. About whether we had been financially careful. about whether we had really thought this through. I asked him what that meant. He said his mother wondered if the pregnancy was planned specifically to access the trust. I sat there for a long moment. I asked him if he believed that. He didn't answer me directly. He said he thought we should all talk, that his mother just wanted to have a conversation, that it would help everyone feel better. I should have stood up and walked out of that kitchen right then. I know that now, but I had been trained, the way so many of us are trained, to believe that keeping the peace was the same thing as being the bigger person. So I agreed to the conversation. We met at her house on a Saturday afternoon. My husband and I sat on one side of her living room and she sat across from us, and his sister sat beside her like they had rehearsed the seating arrangement in advance. His mother was composed and articulate, and she laid out in very measured language her belief that my pregnancy was a financial maneuver. She used the word strategic. She said she had always suspected that I was drawn to her son for the wrong reasons. She said she had done research, that she had spoken to people and she had concerns. I asked her to tell me specifically what research and what people. She changed the subject. My husband said nothing. I drove home that afternoon with my hands tight on the steering wheel and my jaw clenched so hard it ached, and I told myself this was temporary, that once the baby arrived everything would normalize, that she would hold her grandchild and whatever this ugliness was would dissolve. I genuinely believed that. I was 29 years old, and I still believed that love, given enough time, could fix things that were fundamentally broken. 3 weeks later she called and invited us to a dinner at a restaurant. A nice one, downtown, the kind with cloth napkins and a sommelier. She said she wanted to clear the air. She said she had been thinking about things and she wanted to start fresh. My husband was visibly relieved. He looked at me with those eyes that said, "Please, just do this. Please let it be okay." And because I loved him, I said yes. The dinner was pleasant on the surface. She was gracious, even warm in her particular clipped way. She ordered sparkling water for the table and a special mocktail for me, since I wasn't drinking, something she made a small kind gesture of ordering without me having to ask. She said she was excited to be a grandmother. She touched my hand once across the table. It almost felt real. I started feeling sick in the car on the way home. Nauseous, which wasn't unusual at that stage of pregnancy. But this was different. Heavier. By the time we got inside, I was dizzy, and by midnight I was in serious pain. My husband took me to the emergency room. The doctor ran tests. The attending physician came to find us with an expression I will never forget as long as I live. She told us that there were traces of a compound in my system. Something that should not have been there. Something that had caused significant distress to my body. She asked me, very quietly, what I had eaten and drunk in the last several hours. She asked me if I had been somewhere I might have come into contact with something unsafe. I told her about the dinner, the mocktail. The one his mother had ordered specifically for me. I want to pause here and tell you that in that moment, lying in that hospital bed with monitors on, and my husband standing at the foot of the bed looking like the floor had dropped out from under him, I did not cry. I was past crying. I was in a place that was very cold and very clear, and in that cold clarity I understood something I had been refusing to understand for months. This woman was not difficult. She was not challenging. She was not someone I needed to find a way to love better or communicate with more carefully. She was dangerous. The police were contacted by the hospital. There was an investigation. The restaurant had security footage. The lab work told its own story. His mother was arrested. His sister, who had been present at the dinner, who I believe knew more than she ever admitted, was questioned at length. And my husband sat beside me in that hospital room, and the first thing he said, the very first thing, after everything that had happened, was that he didn't understand how his mother could have done this, because she had always just been trying to protect the family. I looked at him for a long time, and then I looked away. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from finally seeing someone clearly. It's not dramatic. It doesn't arrive with a crash. It comes in quietly, the way a tide goes out. And you realize that what you thought was solid ground is just wet sand. I recovered physically. My daughter was born healthy that spring. She is the most extraordinary person I have ever met, and she was worth every single thing that came after. What came after was this. I filed for divorce. I retained an attorney. I documented everything: the comments, the conversations, the dinner, the medical records, the police report. My husband fought the divorce initially, as though somehow the momentum of our life together could be used to paper over what had happened. His attorney argued that his mother had acted alone, that he had no knowledge, that he was also a victim in this. Maybe he was. I thought about that for a long time, whether a person can be a victim of their parents' actions while also being a person who sat across from you and said nothing when he should have said everything. I decided that those two things can both be true and that it didn't change my answer. I went back to school while the legal proceedings moved forward. I had always been good with numbers. I finished my accounting certification, then I kept going. I specialized in forensic accounting, which felt, honestly, a little like the universe having a specific sense of humor about my life. I understand now why I was drawn to it. There is something deeply satisfying about looking at a set of numbers and finding the truth buried inside them, finding the place where someone thought they had covered their tracks and discovering that they hadn't. His mother took a plea. She received a sentence that her attorneys worked hard to reduce but could not eliminate entirely. I was not present for the sentencing. I did not need to be. I had already said everything I needed to say in the documentation I submitted. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in February. I remember walking out of the courthouse into cold, bright sunlight and standing on the steps for a minute before I walked to my car. My daughter was at my mother's house. I was going to pick her up and take her to the park. That was the plan for the rest of the day. Just the two of us, feeding ducks like nothing extraordinary had happened or was happening. Like the world was just ordinary and manageable. And ours. That was 2 years ago. I run a small forensic accounting practice now. I started with one client, a local business owner who needed some contract work done, and it grew from there in the quiet, organic way that things grow when you put real work into them. I have 3 full-time employees. I have an office with a window that looks out over the city. My daughter has her own bedroom that she has decorated with exactly the chaos and specificity that a 4-year-old decorates a room. And every morning I drink my coffee standing in the doorway of that room, watching the organized disorder of it, and I feel something I used to think was not available to me. I feel safe. People ask me sometimes, friends, people who know the full story, whether I'm angry, whether I hate her, his mother, whether I want to see her suffer. I understand why they ask. The story invites that question, but the honest answer is that I stopped being angry a long time ago. Not because I forgave her in any warm and spiritual sense, but because I realized that anger at her required me to keep giving her space in my mind, and my mind had better things to do with the space. What I feel toward my ex-husband is more complicated, and I'll be honest about that. There are days when I think about the man I married, the quiet, funny man at the birthday dinner, and I feel a kind of sadness for who he could have been if he had ever once in his life found the courage to choose himself over his mother. But that is his work to do, not mine. My daughter knows her father. They have a relationship. I facilitate that with as much grace as I can manage, because she deserves a full life, and a full life includes knowing both of her parents. What I want to tell you, and this is the reason I'm telling you any of this at all, is that the thing that almost destroyed me was not the poison. It was not the hospital. It was not even the divorce. It was the year before all of that. The year of dinners I attended when I should have left. The year of conversations where I modulated my own responses to avoid causing discomfort to people who were actively harming me. The year of telling myself that boundaries were harsh, that patience was a virtue, that surely this would get better. That I owed something to the structure of this marriage even when the marriage had become a container for other people's dysfunction. We are told to be gracious. We are told that family is sacred. We are told that the willingness to endure is a form of strength. But there is a difference between endurance and survival, and that difference lives in whether or not you are choosing to stay. I was not choosing. I was defaulting. I was doing what I had been conditioned to do, which was to make myself smaller and quieter and more accommodating, right up until the moment that accommodation nearly cost me my life and my daughter's life. The last time I saw his mother was across a courtroom. She was smaller than I remembered, which happens sometimes when the fear of a person leaves you and you can see them plainly. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had spent a lifetime holding on to something with both hands and had lost it anyway. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated in the dramatic way I might have expected. I felt clear. The same cold clarity I felt in the hospital, but without the fear inside it. She looked at me once, briefly, before her attorney redirected her attention. I looked back, and then I picked up my bag and I walked out through the doors, and I went to pick up my daughter from daycare, and we went home and made dinner together. Her standing on her step stool at the counter helping me tear the lettuce, very seriously, with the concentration of someone performing important work. That is what I think of when people ask me what winning looks like. It looks like that. It looks like Tuesday night salad with a 4-year-old who is completely unafraid. I know there are people watching this who are in the middle of something. Maybe not this exact thing, but something that shares its shape. A family that asks you to betray yourself in small ways that accumulate into something large. A partner who loves you but not enough to protect you. A situation where leaving feels more impossible than staying, even though staying is costing you pieces of yourself you will not be able to get back. I am not going to tell you what to do. I am 33 years old and I have made enough wrong turns to understand that nobody knows your specific road better than you do. What I will tell you is this. The day I stopped trying to make myself acceptable to people who had already decided I wasn't, is the day my actual life began. Not the life I was managing, not the life I was maintaining. My life. The one that was waiting for me on the other side of every accommodation I had been making out of fear. The price of getting there was high. I am not going to pretend it wasn't. I lost a marriage. I lost the version of my future I had planned on. I lost years of stability and certainty that I had worked hard to build. Those losses were real and I let myself grieve them properly. Which is the other thing no one tells you about leaving a toxic situation. You are allowed to grieve it. The grief doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. But what I gained was something I don't have a clean single word for. It's the feeling of walking into a room and not bracing. The feeling of making a decision and not immediately checking it against someone else's reaction. The feeling of being tired at the end of a day because you did real work, not because you spent all your energy managing someone else's instability. My daughter handed me a crayon this morning. Purple. She wanted me to draw a horse. I drew the most structurally questionable horse in the history of art, and she looked at it very seriously and said it was beautiful, and then asked if we could give it wings. So we gave it wings. That is the life I have now. If you are somewhere in the middle of a story like mine, please hear this. You do not have to wait until something catastrophic forces the decision. You are allowed to leave a situation that is slowly diminishing you before it reaches the point of no return. Your peace is not something you have to earn by suffering enough first. It's already yours. It's been yours the whole time. Thank you for listening. If this story reached something in you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've had to make a hard choice to protect your own peace, tell me about it. Because your story matters too. Please subscribe to Recovery Stories for more. I'll see you in the next one. I think about cause and effect a lot these days, not in any abstract philosophical way, just in the very plain practical sense that every choice a person makes sets something else in motion, and eventually the motion catches up with them. My mother-in-law made a series of choices. She chose to see my pregnancy as a threat instead of a child. She chose to act on that fear in the most calculated, cold way a person can act. She chose at every point where she could have stopped, not to stop. And my husband made his own set of choices, quieter ones, the kind that don't look like choices because they're wrapped in passivity, but they are choices all the same. The choice to stay silent. The choice to protect his comfort over his wife. The choice to stand in the doorway between harm and safety and not move. Those choices had consequences. That is not a moral judgment. It's just what happened, what I've learned. And I don't think I could have learned this any other way, which is the most frustrating part. Is that integrity is not something you perform for an audience. It's something you practice in the small moments when no one is watching and nothing is at stake yet. My mother-in-law had been a certain kind of person for decades before she ordered that drink. My husband had been a certain kind of person for years before he sat in that hospital room and said what he said. Neither of them woke up one morning and decided to become who they were. They became who they were one small compromise at a time, one small abdication at a time. And I had been a certain kind of person too. Someone who confused tolerance with virtue. Someone who stayed at tables where she wasn't respected because leaving felt rude. That is the part of this story I sit with the longest, because it's the part I can actually do something about. The intelligence I needed wasn't book intelligence. I had plenty of that. The intelligence I needed was the kind that lets you look at a situation clearly, without the distortion of hope or fear or social conditioning, and call it what it is. I was slow to develop that. Most of us are. We are taught from very early on to explain away the discomfort we feel in rooms that are not safe, to tell ourselves we are being too sensitive, too demanding, too quick to judge. That teaching costs people enormously, and it cost me a year of my life I will not get back. What I want my daughter to understand when she is old enough to understand it, and I think about this more than almost anything else, is that strength is not the absence of fear. Strength is what you do after you feel the fear and realize that staying afraid is more dangerous than moving forward. She is 4 years old and she already has more courage than I had at 29. She will walk up to a stranger at the park and say hello without flinching. I am learning from her as much as she is learning from me. The life I have now is not perfect. It is genuinely, ordinarily imperfect in all the ways a real life is. I am tired sometimes. I make mistakes at work. There are nights I eat cereal for dinner because I don't have the energy to cook, and my daughter thinks that's the greatest thing that has ever happened to her, which helps. But it is mine. Every room I walk into, every decision I make, every morning I wake up, mine. And that is not a small thing. That is, as far as I can tell, the whole thing.